Hello everybody and welcome back to 4AF. To those who don't know us, I'm Alex.
I'm Michael.
And we are 4AF. Michael, that super secret project I've been working on.
Yeah?
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 Michael, it might be here.
It's finally here.
It's here.
After all this time
It is.
and all those spoilers.
Yes. So this is going to be a 4AF build project and it's finally ready. We've, as he said, we've been drip feeding some spoilers to everyone and now we get to show off the finished thing. So we've got a few similar sized projects out on the channel and Michael, this one might be my favourite yet.
Favourite?
It might be. I've spent a lot of hours and a lot of time on it, and I love it. I loved every part of it.
I can't wait to see it then.
So it's going to be a desert theme, as you might be able to tell from our little bits and bobs around here.
No wonder it's sandy.
Yep, sand everywhere. That's the theme right now.
It's coarse and rough. You know? Yeah.
So I guess yeah, desert theme, but with a bit of a twist. We can't have it being the same as the survival world, Michael.
Oh, no, of course not. No.
No, I get to put a creative flair on it.
Ah, okay.
A creative flair. So, I guess, without further ado...
Yeah.
Let's jump right in and get to it. I wanted to capture the sprawling, eroded mesa vibes that vanilla Minecraft already has and dial it up to 11. So I made sure to use lots of plateaus and buttes reaching up into the sky. My favourite part of building is finding those little details that aren't in Minecraft's normal generation but make so much sense once they're there. So I made sure to add plenty of overhangs so that the plants and buildings I add later are going to have plenty of shade and protection from that harsh desert sun. Once I'd got my initial shape ironed out, I brought it into a normal Minecraft world. I find it easier to do it this way because there are less distractions in super flat and you can really see what you're working with. But when you bring it across, if there are any areas with sand, you might lose them to the terrain that you're pasting on top of. I got super lucky because I found this spot in the first world that I loaded, using the locate command. It had everything I wanted and more, so I set about finishing up my terrain and making sure that it blended well into the surroundings. I don't want it to look out of place, but it's going to look different because it's handmade instead of generated, so I tried to go for the middle ground of blending it, but keeping it as its own separate biome. Because this is a desert-themed build, I did a fair bit of research and magpieing ideas from different fantasy desert-themed games, photos and artworks, as well as a bunch of real-life cultures when I was trying to plan it out. Some of the most striking things that I saw over and over again were the use of bones and rock formations. I knew straight away that I wanted to use them both. I toyed around with a few ideas, but I'd never attempted to build anything like this before, so sculpting a reasonably anatomically sound skull was a lot of work. And I went for a large cat skull, even though they weren't likely found in any extensive deserts, fantasy or otherwise, purely because it's recognisable, and sometimes you have to compromise plausibility for impact. And besides, this is a fantasy desert. Who's to say there weren't gigantic cats roaming around a couple thousand years ago? The rock formations I used are called cairns, and they've been seen in all different kinds of places around Earth, but I've seen them used in a bunch of games on huge scales to great effect. I wanted to emulate that, and made several different colours and shapes of rocks to highlight them, making sure that they looked reasonably balanced and not like they were about to topple over. Next came one of my favourite parts of the project. I'd seen a couple of photos a while back of huge dragon skulls overflowing with greenery, and if I could link where I saw them I would, but unfortunately it's been a long time now, and I don't remember where I saw them. I'd just like to shout out the fact that Minecraft has one of the most incredible communities of building that I've ever seen, and there are people coming out with designs and projects that inspire and amaze me in equal measure all the time. So if any of you are watching right now are builders, please drop a like and shout out whatever you're working on in the comments because I'd love to hear about it. I knew I wanted something huge, like a temple, to really get across the size and scale of the project, and after doing a bit more research I came up with the idea of a ziggurat. For anyone who isn't familiar with the term, ziggurats were a pyramid-like structure first developed in Mesopotamia, and I didn't know much at all about them or the first port of human civilization before working on this, but I've loved reading about it, so I apologise in advance for the ramble that I might go on here. Ziggurats were constructed with two kinds of bricks. First, mud bricks for the interior, and second, baked bricks for the exterior. They were often places of worship and acted as shrines for the Mesopotamian gods, of which there were many. Roughly 3,600 were listed in Sumerian texts at the end of the 3rd millennium BC. Mesopotamia was primarily made up of its main cities and the desert, and you might be surprised to know they were actually conquered by Alexander the Great in 331 BC. Even by that point, Babylonia One of those cities was heralded as one of the greatest architectural marvels in human history. It had high walls and multiple palaces and temples within its limits, one of which was the famous Ishtar Gate, a reconstruction of which sits in a Berlin museum right now as of 2024. I toyed around with a few different ideas when designing the buildings for the main city, but eventually I settled on a mix of birch and sandstone materials, with spruce to contrast the red and orange tones of the terrain. This whole project was made with the intention of the buildings and the city not being reversed. I wanted to make it appear as though the current settlers had built upon the ruined structures of previous civilizations. A lot of the early settlements didn't have access to durable, hardy resources, least of all in the desert, so their buildings eventually eroded, and new buildings were built on top of them. It was a process that made them appear elevated, creating crests of accumulated debris called tells, an archaeological term apparently borrowed from Arabic. In the desert, there wouldn't have been much water, and as it's the first and most important resource required for life, I knew I needed a way to bring water to the surface, high above the oasis that I had planned for down below. I used an aqueduct for this, but I made sure to have it appear broken and worn down by time. When it came time to design the plants for the oasis, I made a variety of different designs including cacti and palm trees. I really wanted to distinguish the difference between the areas that had water and the areas that didn't. Using hardier, more arid plants allowed me to keep the balance of green without giving the surface that lush oasis appearance that I wanted below. The palace was actually a spur-of-the-moment build, after I reflected on Mesopotamia and Babylon and how they had multiple temples and palaces. If the ziggurat or temple was for worship, where was the king or queen to live? The oasis was finally underway with plants and grass and shoreline structures that helped the water to feel less flat. I wasn't sure about the bridge designs though, and figured I could always come back and change them later, the perks of this being Minecraft and not the real world. With almost all of the structures finished and settled in their places, all that was left to do was the final touches to the terrain. I added more variety to the surfaces with slabs, buttons and pressure plates, intending for them to give the ground an uneven and windswept appearance, like the sand was forever blowing in and no one was there to sweep it. This meant that it was also finally time to add those tells I mentioned earlier, and mounds of sand between buildings and along the flat walls. Finally, I was on to the last major addition to the project. With the majority of the legwork done, all that was left was the water around the outside of the project, and redesigning the bridge between the two clusters of buildings. When I chose to redo the bridge, I knew I wanted it to better reflect the industriousness of the people who had moved into the oasis. This meant firm infrastructure instead of wooden planks and careful planning. When it was finally finished, I was more than happy with the improvement. With that done, I knew the project was coming to a close. There are, of course, still things that I could change or add to the project, and it might be an idea that I revisit in the future. I've enjoyed it immensely, and I hope you all did too, delving into this fantasy world and a few of the fascinating cultures that inspired it. So, before we show you the finished thing, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who made it this far. I really appreciate you, and I'd love to hear what you thought of how it all came together.
you wondered how you could have found such a treasure? The gods have a plan for you, a destiny. And there are those who would use this power to destroy the world.